Steve Harvey has hosted Family Feud for well over a decade, and in that time, he has encountered thousands of contestants, heard countless answers, and shared more laughs than most people experience in a lifetime. But on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in November 2024, something happened that stopped Steve Harvey in his tracks. The man who always has a quick response, who can turn any moment into comedy or wisdom, stood completely frozen on that stage, unable to speak, unable to move, as tears streamed down his face. The reason was a 91-year-old World War II veteran named Walter Thompson from a small town in rural Mississippi. And what Walter revealed about the one thing he wanted before dying would shake Steve Harvey to his core and remind millions of viewers what truly matters in life. If this story moved you the way it moved everyone in that studio, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another incredible Family Feud moment. The Thompson family had driven 14 hours from Mississippi to California to be on Family Feud, and they made quite an entrance when they walked onto that stage. There were 5 of them in matching burgundy shirts, but every eye in the studio was immediately drawn to the elderly man at the front of the line. Walter Thompson moved slowly with the help of a walker, his back bent from age, but his eyes still sharp and clear. He wore his World War II veteran cap proudly, the faded fabric telling its own story of decades gone by. His skin was weathered like old leather, mapped with wrinkles that spoke of a life fully lived, and when he smiled, which he did often, it was the kind of smile that made you feel like everything was going to be all right. Behind Walter stood his daughter Ruth Ann, 68, a retired schoolteacher who had dedicated her life to educating children in the same small town where she grew up. Next to Ruth Ann was her son William, 45, a pastor at the local Baptist church, who had inherited his grandfather's gentle spirit and gift for touching people's hearts. Beside William stood his wife Denise and their daughter Destiny, who at 22 was the youngest member of the Thompson family team. 4 generations of Thompsons, all gathered on that stage because Destiny had written a letter to Family Feud explaining why her great-grandfather deserved to be on the show before it was too late. Steve Harvey approached the family with visible respect, immediately extending his hand to Walter. The elderly man's handshake was surprisingly firm, and Steve held on to it for a moment longer than usual, recognizing something in Walter's eyes that demanded acknowledgement. "Sir, welcome to Family Feud. Now I can see from your cap that you are a veteran. What branch did you serve in?" Walter straightened up as much as his aged body would allow, pride evident in every line of his face. "United States Army, Mr. Harvey. Served in the European theatre from 1943 to 1945. I was at Normandy." A hush fell over the audience, followed by a wave of applause that seemed to wash over the studio. Steve Harvey removed his imaginary hat in a gesture of respect. "Sir, you were at Normandy. You are a genuine American hero. How old are you now?" Walter chuckled softly. "I am 91 years old, Mr. Harvey. Still kicking, though not as high as I used to." The audience laughed warmly, but Steve's expression remained serious beneath his smile. 91 years old and still standing. That is a blessing right there. Now tell me, Mr. Thompson, what did you do after the war?" Walter's eyes grew distant for a moment, travelling back through decades of memory. "I came home and married my sweetheart, worked the same farm my daddy worked, raised 4 children with my wife Mabel, and tried to live a good life. Nothing fancy, Mr. Harvey, just an ordinary life." Steve shook his head slowly. "Sir, There is nothing ordinary about you. Nothing ordinary at all. What the audience did not know yet was that Walter Thompson had been given 6 months to live. The cancer had spread too far, and at 91 years old, aggressive treatment was not an option. His family had gathered around him when the doctors delivered the news, expecting tears, expecting despair. Instead, Walter had smiled that peaceful smile of his and said he had lived a full life with no regrets. But then his great-granddaughter Destiny had asked him if there was anything he still wanted to do, anything left undone. Walter had been quiet for a long moment before answering. What he said had broken everyone's hearts and set in motion the events that led to this moment on the Family Feud stage. The game itself was emotional from the start. The Thompson family faced off against the Richardson family from Tennessee, and both teams played with heart and determination. But it was clear that something special was happening with the Thompsons. Every time Walter gave an answer, the audience would hold their breath, and when his answers hit the board, they would erupt in celebration. When asked to name something a farmer wakes up early to do, Walter said, "Feed the animals," and scored the number 1 answer. When asked what a man might give his wife for their 50th anniversary, Walter said, "All my love," and the answer, while not on the board, earned him a standing ovation from the audience anyway. Steve Harvey kept returning to Walter between rounds, drawn to the elderly man in a way that seemed to transcend the usual host-contestant relationship. "Mr. Thompson, I have to ask you something. You have been on this earth for 91 years. What is the secret to a long life?" Walter considered the question seriously before answering. "Love, Mr. Harvey. Love God. Love your family. Love your neighbor. And never go to bed angry at anyone. Life is too short for grudges, even when it is 91 years long." The Thompson family won the main game, and the decision was made that Walter and his great-granddaughter Destiny would play fast money together. It was a beautiful pairing, the oldest and youngest members of the family, representing 4 generations of Thompsons. As Walter made his way slowly to the fast money podium, the audience rose to their feet in a spontaneous standing ovation. The 91-year-old veteran waved his hand humbly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention but deeply moved by the respect. Steve approached Walter with a gentleness that everyone noticed. "All right, Mr. Thompson. This is fast money. You know how it works. 5 questions, 20 seconds. Just say the first thing that comes to your mind. Now, are you ready?" Walter nodded, his gnarled hands gripping the podium for support. "I am ready, Mr. Harvey. Been ready for a long time." The timer appeared on the screen, and Steve launched into the questions. Name something a person might do every night before bed. Walter answered immediately, "Pray." Steve continued, "Name somewhere people go to find peace. Church. How many years makes a long marriage? Forever. Name something a grandfather passes down to his grandchildren. His stories. Name the one thing you want most before you die." Walter paused. The pause was only a second or 2, but it felt like an eternity. When he answered, his voice was barely above a whisper, but the microphone caught every word. "To see my boy again." The buzzer sounded, and the studio fell into a profound silence. Steve Harvey stood completely still, something flickering across his face that the audience could not quite read. "Let us see how you did, Mr. Thompson." Destiny took her position in the soundproof booth, and Walter's answers were revealed one by one. Pray before bed was the number 1 answer with 38 points. Church for Peace earned 29 points. Forever for a Long Marriage got 15 points. His stories for what a grandfather passes down was the number 2 answer with 25 points. Then came the final answer. Steve Harvey looked at the board, then back at Walter. "You said to see my boy again, for the one thing you want most before you die." He paused, his voice catching. Surveys said, "That is not up there, Mr. Thompson." The audience murmured sympathetically, but Walter did not seem to notice. He was staring at something far away, his eyes glistening with tears that had not yet fallen. Steve Harvey noticed immediately. He took a step closer to Walter, his professional demeanor giving way to genuine human concern. "Mr. Thompson, who is your boy?" The studio went absolutely silent. Ruth Ann, Walter's daughter, began to cry quietly. William the pastor put his arm around his mother. And Walter Thompson, 91-year-old World War II veteran, began to tell a story that would bring the entire studio to its knees. "My boy was named James," Walter began, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "He was my youngest son, born in 1952. From the moment that child came into this world, he was my shadow. Everywhere I went on that farm, little James was right behind me. He wanted to do everything I did, be everything I was." Walter smiled at the memory, a smile filled with so much love that it was almost painful to witness. James grew up strong and good. He went to church every Sunday, helped his mama in the kitchen, worked the fields alongside me without ever complaining. When he turned 18 in 1970, he told me he wanted to serve his country like I had. He wanted to make me proud. Walter's voice wavered. "I told him I was already proud. I told him he did not have to prove anything to anyone. But James had his mother's stubbornness. He enlisted in the army and shipped out to Vietnam 3 months later." A heavy weight settled over the audience. Several people were already wiping their eyes, sensing where this story was going. James wrote me letters every week from Vietnam. He told me about the friends he made, about the food he missed, about how he could not wait to come home and work the farm with me again. The last letter he sent was dated November 14th, 1971. He said he would be home for Christmas. He said he had a surprise for me. Walter's voice broke, and he had to take a moment to compose himself. James was killed in action on November 21st, 1971. He was 19 years old. He never came home. The gasp that rippled through the audience was followed by the sound of open weeping. People clutched their chests, covered their mouths, held on to strangers sitting next to them. Steve Harvey had not moved. He stood frozen in place, tears streaming down his face, completely unable to speak. Walter continued, his voice growing stronger even as the tears finally spilled down his weathered cheeks. "For 53 years, I have lived with that hole in my heart. I buried my wife Mabel 12 years ago, and I know she is up in heaven with our James, waiting for me. The doctors told me last month that I have 6 months left, maybe less." The revelation sent another shockwave through the audience. Ruth Ann was sobbing openly now. And even Destiny, still in the soundproof booth, had somehow sensed that something profound was happening and was pressing her hands against the glass. When my great-granddaughter asked me what I wanted before I died, I told her the truth. I want to see my boy again. I want to hold him one more time. I want to tell him that I have missed him every single day for 53 years, and that I am finally coming home to him. Steve Harvey still had not moved. The host who always had something to say, who could turn any moment into laughter or wisdom, stood frozen like a statue, tears carving rivers down his face. 10 seconds passed. 20 seconds, 30 seconds of complete silence as Steve Harvey processed what he had just heard. When Steve finally spoke, His voice was barely recognizable, thick with emotion and breaking on every word. "Mr. Thompson, I have been doing television for over 30 years. I have interviewed presidents and celebrities and athletes and musicians, but I have never, he could not finish the sentence. He had to stop and press his hand against his chest, physically overcome. Walter reached out and patted Steve's arm gently, the old man now comforting the host. "It is all right, son. It is all right. I did not mean to upset anyone. I just wanted to tell the truth." Steve shook his head, wiping his eyes with both hands. "Mr. Thompson, you did not upset anyone. You just reminded everyone in this room what matters in life. You reminded us about sacrifice, about love, about the price that families like yours have paid for this country." Steve turned to face the audience, his voice gaining strength. "This man gave his son for our freedom. 53 years ago, a 19-year-old boy named James Thompson died serving this country, and his father has carried that loss every single day since. And now, at 91 years old, facing his own final days, the only thing he wants is to see his son again." The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. People were not just clapping. They were crying, hugging each other. Some were even praying with their heads bowed. It was one of those rare moments when a television studio transforms into something sacred. What happened next would become one of the most talked-about moments in Family Feud history. Steve Harvey walked over to Walter and helped him step away from the podium. Then Steve did something unprecedented. He got down on one knee in front of the 91-year-old veteran, took Walter's weathered hands in his own, and spoke directly to him. "Mr. Thompson, I cannot give you what you want most. I cannot bring James back. But I can tell you something that I believe with all my heart. Your boy is proud of you. He's watching you right now, and he is so proud of the man you are, the life you have lived, the family you have raised. And when your time comes, whenever that is, James is going to be right there waiting for you. You are going to see your boy again, Mr. Thompson. That is not a hope. That is a promise from God." Walter looked down at Steve Harvey, this famous television host kneeling before him like a son before a father, and smiled that peaceful smile. "I know I will, son. I know I will." The Thompson family gathered around Walter as the audience continued to applaud. 4 generations of Thompsons, bound together by love and faith and the memory of a young man who never came home from Vietnam. Destiny had finally emerged from the soundproof booth, and she ran to her great-grandfather, throwing her arms around him and sobbing against his chest. Steve Harvey stood up and addressed the cameras directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to say something. The Thompson family came here today to play a game and maybe win some money. But what they gave us is worth more than any prize we could ever offer. They gave us perspective. They reminded us what matters. They showed us what real love looks like, what real sacrifice means, what real faith can do." He paused, looking back at Walter. "This man is a hero, not just because he stormed the beaches at Normandy. Not just because he raised a family and worked an honest job and lived a good life. He is a hero because he has carried the weight of losing his son for 53 years. And he is still standing. He is still smiling. He is still loving. That is what a hero looks like." When the episode aired 4 weeks later, it broke viewing records. The clip of Walter's revelation went viral within hours, viewed hundreds of millions of times across every social media platform. News networks around the world covered the story. newspapers ran front-page features about the 91-year-old veteran and his lost son. The hashtag Walter and James trended globally for 3 straight days. But the most remarkable response came from fellow veterans and military families. Thousands of letters poured in from people who had lost sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, husbands, and wives to war. They wrote to Walter thanking him for giving voice to their grief, for showing the world that some wounds never fully heal but can be carried with grace. Vietnam veterans who had served alongside James reached out with stories about him, filling in pieces of his life that Walter had never known. One veteran sent a photograph of James that Walter had never seen, showing him laughing with friends just weeks before he died. Walter held that photograph and wept for hours. The Department of Veterans Affairs reached out to the family, and Walter was invited to Washington, D.C. for a special ceremony, honoring both his service and his son's sacrifice. Too weak to travel, Walter watched via video call as his son James was posthumously awarded a medal that had been lost in bureaucratic paperwork for over 50 years. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs spoke directly to Walter through the screen, thanking him for his service and apologizing for taking so long to properly honor his son. Steve Harvey flew to Mississippi 3 times in the following months to visit Walter. The two had formed a bond that transcended their brief time together on television. Steve would sit on Walter's porch for hours, listening to stories about the farm, about Mabel, about James. He learned that James had been an artist who sketched portraits of his fellow soldiers. He learned that James had planned to propose to his high school sweetheart when he returned home. He learned that the surprise James mentioned in his final letter was a hand-carved jewelry box he had made for his mother. On Steve's last visit, Walter was in hospice care, his body finally surrendering to the illness that had been slowly claiming him. The family had gathered, knowing the end was near. Steve sat beside Walter's bed, holding the old man's hand, and they talked about heaven. "Are you afraid?" Steve asked softly. Walter shook his head, his voice weak but certain. "Not one bit, son. My Mabel is waiting for me, and my James." He smiled that peaceful smile one last time. "I am finally going to see my boy, again." Walter Thompson passed away on a quiet Sunday morning, surrounded by his family, with hymns playing softly in the background. He was 91 years old. The news of his passing was reported by major networks, a testament to how deeply his story had touched the nation. The funeral was held at the small Baptist church, where Walter and Mabel had been married 67 years earlier, where James had been baptized, where William now served as pastor. Over 1,000 people attended, most of them strangers who had driven from across the country just to pay their respects. Steve Harvey delivered one of the eulogies, his voice breaking as he spoke about the man who had taught him more about love and faith in a few months than he had learned in decades of life. "Walter Thompson lived 91 years, Steve said, standing before the overflowing church. He served his country in the greatest war in human history. He built a farm from nothing, raised a family with love, and buried his youngest son before his time. He carried grief that would have broken most men. But Walter was not most men. Walter was a man of faith, a man of strength, a man who believed with every fiber of his being that death was not the end. And right now, at this very moment, I believe Walter is getting exactly what he wanted. He is seeing his boy again. He is holding James, and they are both finally home." The family buried Walter next to his wife Mabel and his son James 3 generations of Thompsons reunited in the small cemetery beside the church. The headstone they chose was simple, bearing only his name, his dates, and a single phrase that captured everything about who he was. He kept the faith. In the months that followed, the Thompson family established the James Thompson Memorial Scholarship, providing funds for the children of fallen soldiers to attend college. The response was overwhelming, with donations pouring in from around the world. Within a year, they had raised enough money to fund scholarships for 50 students, with more being added every month. Family Feud created a special segment called Honoring Our Heroes, dedicated to featuring veteran contestants and sharing their stories. It was named after Walter Thompson, and his photograph was displayed in the studio as a permanent tribute. Every time a veteran contestant appeared on the show, Steve Harvey would pause to acknowledge Walter's legacy, reminding viewers that behind every uniform is a human being with a family, with dreams, with a story worth telling. The story of Walter Thompson reminds us that some people walk among us carrying burdens we cannot see, losses we cannot imagine, love we cannot fully comprehend. Walter spent 53 years missing his son, 53 years carrying the weight of a sacrifice that most of us will never have to make. And yet he lived with grace, with faith, with an unshakable belief that one day he would see his boy again. Steve Harvey said it best during that unforgettable moment of silence on the Family Feud stage. "I cannot bring James back, but I can tell you that your boy is proud of you." Those words carried the weight of truth, the kind of truth that transcends television and touches something eternal. If Walter's story touched your heart, if it made you think about the veterans in your life, the parents who have lost children, the families carrying invisible grief, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Call a veteran and thank them for their service. Call your parents and tell them you love them. Because Walter Thompson understood something that we all need to remember. Life is short, even when it is 91 years long, and the only thing that truly matters is love. This was the story of Walter Thompson, the man who waited 53 years to see his son again. And it is a reminder that sometimes the most powerful moments on television are not scripted. They are simply human beings being human, showing us what faith looks like, what love looks like, what it means to keep going, even when your heart is broken. Walter is with his James now. He is with his Mabel. He is finally home. And somewhere, in a place beyond our understanding, a father and son are together again, and neither one will ever have to say goodbye.